I guess some people just aren't meant to succeed in life. My wife here is living proof of that. Those words hung in the air like toxic smoke at our company's annual gala. The crystal champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers as my husband's voice, amplified by the microphone he'd so confidently taken, continued to dissect my supposed inadequacies in front of 200 colleagues, friends, and industry leaders. I stood frozen in my black cocktail dress, the one I'd spent 3 paychecks on because he'd insisted I at least try to look successful for once. The room's ambient lighting suddenly felt too harsh, exposing every insecurity I'd ever had. She had such big dreams, he continued with that charming smile that had once made me feel special, but now dripped with condescension. Wanted to revolutionize architectural sustainability. But some people just don't have what it takes, right? Scattered, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. I saw my boss shift awkwardly, looking anywhere but at me. My colleague Rachel's eyes widened in shock before darting away. No one moved to stop him. 15 years of marriage has taught me patience, though. Someone's got to be the backbone, right? The actual breadwinner. He raised his glass, his wedding ring catching the light, to carrying the weight of 2. I'd spent 7 years at this architectural firm, slowly climbing the ladder despite my husband constantly undermining my confidence at home. But this was different. This was public execution of everything I'd worked for. The worst part? This wasn't even the alcohol talking. Thomas was perfectly sober, his blue eyes clear and calculating as they found mine across the room. This was deliberate. This was punishment. Just 3 days earlier, I'd been quietly informed by the firm's partners that I was being considered for the sustainability director position, a role my husband had been angling for since he joined the company through my connections 2 years ago. "Are you going to say something?" whispered Diane, one of the few senior architects who'd ever shown me genuine support. Her hand found my elbow, steadying me. But what could I say? That my Harvard-educated, smooth-talking husband had systematically eroded my confidence for years? That behind our perfect Christmas cards and vacation photos was a man who accidentally deleted my presentation files, who scheduled surprise romantic getaways that coincided with my important meetings, who told me I was too emotional to lead. I still remember the day I brought home the news about my first major project approval. He'd looked up from his laptop and said, "That's nice, honey. Though I'm surprised they'd trust something that important to someone still finding their footing." Always the backhanded compliment, the subtle dig wrapped in seeming support. The microphone was finally taken from him by Marcus, the firm's founder, who awkwardly pivoted to announcements about quarterly achievements. I felt the heat of stares and whispers as I mechanically moved toward the ladies' room, my legs somehow carrying me despite feeling like they might dissolve beneath me. Inside a bathroom stall, I pressed my forehead against the cool partition and closed my eyes, refusing to let tears fall. This wasn't just about a humiliating speech. This was about years of psychological chess moves I hadn't even realized we were playing. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Thomas. "Don't make a scene. We'll talk at home." Something snapped inside me at that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of a thread that's been stretched beyond its capacity. I walked to the mirror, reapplied my lipstick, and studied my reflection. I was 38 years old. The lines around my eyes told stories of laughter I rarely experienced anymore. My shoulders curved inward slightly. When had I started making myself smaller? "You know, he's been telling the board you've been struggling with anxiety and might not be ready for advancement," said a voice behind me. It was Helen from HR, her expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. "I shouldn't tell you this, but after tonight, you deserve to know what you're dealing with." I thanked her with a steadiness that surprised even me. When I returned to the gala, Thomas was surrounded by senior partners, laughing as if his public dismantling of his wife had been just another charming anecdote. He caught my eye and had the audacity to wink. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a hotel 3 blocks from our brownstone, sitting cross-legged on the bed in my expensive dress, making lists, sending emails, and forming a plan while the city lights blinked through the curtains like distant stars guiding me toward something I couldn't yet name. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. and I had exactly 24 hours to do it. The thing about being called a failure is that it forces you to define what success actually means to you. As I sat in that hotel room watching the sunrise paint the city in gold and promise, I realized I'd been measuring my worth through my husband's distorted lens for far too long. My phone had 27 missed calls from Thomas. The voicemails evolved from stern, "This little drama needs to end now," to concerned, "Honey, I'm worried about you," to angry. This is exactly the kind of immature behavior I was talking about. Typical Thomas, shifting strategies when one manipulation didn't work. I ordered room service coffee and pulled out my laptop. First order of business, emails. There were dozens from colleagues, some genuinely concerned, others thinly veiling their morbid curiosity. But the one that mattered was from Marcus himself. "My office, 9 a.m. We need to discuss last night." Perfect. That gave me 3 hours to prepare. I showered, letting the hot water wash away 15 years of doubt. As I dressed in my emergency office outfit from my gym bag, I mentally cataloged every instance Thomas had undermined a project, every accidental scheduling conflict he'd created before my presentations, every time he'd accessed my work files on our shared home network. The patterns were so clear now. How had I missed them? I remembered our 5th anniversary dinner, when I'd mentioned applying for the Johnson project lead. "That's a lot of pressure, babe. Remember how overwhelmed you got with the Westridge development? I just hate seeing you stressed." His concern had seemed so genuine that I'd withdrawn my name from consideration the next day. The Johnson project went on to win industry awards under Thomas's leadership, or the time I'd been invited to speak at the Sustainability Summit, a huge professional opportunity. 2 days before the event, Thomas had surprised me with tickets to a beachfront resort. "You work too hard. You need a break." When I'd hesitated, he'd looked so hurt. "I was just trying to take care of you. But if your career is more important than our marriage..." I'd gone on the trip. My replacement speaker had made valuable connections with the very clients I'd been hoping to impress. Each incident seemed isolated at the time. Each manipulation was covered in just enough plausible deniability and seeming concern for my well-being that I doubted my own instincts. The pattern extended beyond work. When I wanted to train for a half marathon, "Sweetheart, you've always struggled with endurance. I don't want you to be disappointed." When I considered taking Italian classes, "Languages were never your strong suit in college, remember?" Always the casual reminder of some past failure, real or invented. Even my friendships had slowly eroded under his subtle influence. "Melissa seems to bring out your insecurities," he'd observe after a lunch with my college friend. "Have you noticed how differently you act around Ben? So eager to impress." Slowly, I'd stopped calling them. Slowly, my world had shrunk to Thomas and his approved circle. I arrived at the office at 8:30, noticing the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. Rachel approached me in the break room, eyes full of sympathy. "We all know he was completely out of line," she said, squeezing my arm. "Nobody takes what he said seriously." But they did. That was the problem. Thomas had been planting seeds of doubt about my competence for months. Last night wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated campaign. At 8:55, I knocked on Marcus's door. Thomas was already there, looking appropriately contrite in his perfectly tailored suit. "Darling," he said, standing to embrace me. I stepped back, maintaining professional distance. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I thought we should clear the air after last night's unfortunate comments." Thomas immediately launched into his performance. "I want to sincerely apologize. The stress of the Harrington project deadline affected my judgment, and I had one too many drinks." He hadn't been drinking. "I would never intentionally hurt my wife, who I respect enormously." A lie. This was a terrible mistake that won't happen again. The only mistake was me believing in him for 15 years. Marcus seemed relieved by this easy resolution. "Well, these things happen in high-pressure environments. The important thing is that we move forward as a team." I smiled politely. "Before we move forward, there's something you should know, Marcus. For the past 6 months, I've been documenting a pattern of professional sabotage that directly impacts this firm's projects and reputation. Thomas's confident smile faltered just slightly. Honey, this isn't the time or place for personal matters. This isn't personal, I replied, my voice steady. This is strictly business. I opened my laptop and turned it toward Marcus. These are emails Thomas sent from my account to clients, canceling meetings I never knew about. Here are calendar manipulations showing how project deadlines were altered without authorization. And here's evidence of files being accessed and modified from our home IP address while I was traveling for the Atlanta project. The color drained from Thomas's face. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown, he said to Marcus, not even looking at me. This is exactly why I've been concerned about her taking on additional responsibility. But Marcus was already scrolling through the evidence, his expression growing more serious by the second. There's more, I said calmly. Much more. I hadn't planned to become an amateur detective in my own marriage, but survival instincts kick in when you're drowning. 6 months earlier, after Thomas had accidentally sent an email criticizing my design approach to the entire department, instead of just to his mentor, I'd started keeping records. It began with simple documentation, screenshots, email timestamps, recorded conversations, legal in our state with one-party consent. But as the evidence mounted, I realized I needed expert help. That's when I contacted Olivia Chen. Olivia was a digital forensics specialist I'd met at a Women in Architecture conference 3 years ago. We'd kept in loose contact, and when I reached out with my suspicions, she agreed to look at my evidence, initially as a professional courtesy, but eventually because, as she put it, this is the most methodical case of gaslighting and sabotage I've seen in 15 years of practice. While Thomas thought I was at yoga classes every Tuesday evening, I was actually meeting with Olivia, building a case file that would become my insurance policy. We never imagined I'd need to use it this soon, but Thomas's public humiliation had forced my hand. These access logs show someone using your credentials to modify the sustainability metrics on the Harrington proposal, Marcus said, frowning at my laptop screen. Reducing the efficiency ratings by just enough to make them questionable, but not obvious. Those changes could have cost us the contract if the client's engineers had caught them, I explained. I discovered and corrected them the night before submission. The IP address traces back to our home network at a time when I was at the office working late, as several colleagues can verify. Thomas's strategy shifted instantly. Marcus, this is ridiculous. We're having marital problems, and she's trying to drag the firm into it. Yes, I've accessed her computer at home. We're married, for God's sake. But this conspiracy theory is exactly the kind of emotional overreaction I was alluding to last night. I had anticipated this exact response. That's why I had a cybersecurity expert document everything, I said, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. This contains her certified findings, including evidence that cannot be explained by casual access to a shared computer. Marcus opened the envelope slowly, his expression hardening as he scanned the contents. Thomas, these allegations are extremely serious. If true, they constitute grounds for immediate termination and possibly legal action by the firm. Thomas's mask slipped completely then. You wouldn't dare, he hissed at me, momentarily forgetting Marcus was there. Everything you have is because of me. Who do you think convinced the partners to keep you after the Mitchell Tower miscalculations? The Mitchell Tower miscalculations that mysteriously appeared in my final report after I'd triple-checked the figures? I raised an eyebrow. Those are documented in the report, too. Marcus stood abruptly. I need to bring the other partners into this discussion. Both of you, stay available but separate today. Human Resources will be contacting you. As Marcus left with my evidence, Thomas turned to me, his handsome face contorted with a rage I'd seen glimpses of but never in full force. You think you're so clever, he said quietly, but you've just destroyed everything we built together. When I'm done explaining your mental health struggles to the board, you'll be lucky to get a job designing doghouses. I stood, smoothing my skirt. That's the thing about being underestimated, Thomas. People don't see you coming. I moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and don't bother going home to delete anything. The cloud backups aren't in our house. I spent the rest of the morning in a small conference room, answering questions from HR and the firm's legal counsel. By noon, the initial shock had worn off, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed my voice. Rachel brought me lunch and sat with me in solidarity. "The entire office is buzzing," she confided. "Thomas is in with the partners now, and he doesn't look good." "Has anyone from the Harrington project been called in?" I asked. "Alex and Priya both. And they brought in the IT director too." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Thomas has been telling people you've been struggling with prescription medication issues." I wasn't even surprised anymore. "Let me guess, that's why I'm paranoid and making up stories?" She nodded. "But it's backfiring. Samantha from accounting apparently told HR that Thomas tried to get her to falsify expense reports related to your client meetings last quarter. Said he told her you'd authorized it, but when she checked with you directly, you knew nothing about it. I hadn't known about Samantha. How many others had Thomas tried to manipulate in his campaign against me?" At 3:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Roof access door code is 5829. Meet me there at 4. Important. Marcus wanted to meet privately, away from prying eyes and ears. This could either be very good or very bad. As I rode the elevator to the top floor, I mentally prepared for all possibilities. Best case, Thomas was being terminated. Worst case, they were firing us both to avoid scandal. Middle ground, an uncomfortable compromise that would require continued interaction with my husband. The spring air was cool on the rooftop garden, a space designed for client entertaining with stunning views of the city. Marcus was already there, looking out over the skyline. "Thomas is being escorted from the building as we speak," he said without preamble. "His company accounts have been suspended, and we'll be conducting a full audit of all projects he's touched." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a new anxiety. "And me?" Marcus turned, looking older and wearier than I'd ever seen him. "That depends. The sustainability director position we were considering you for. Are you still interested?" I blinked, momentarily stunned. "After everything that's happened today?" "Especially after everything that's happened today," he replied. "You've demonstrated extraordinary resilience and integrity under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Those are exactly the qualities we need in leadership." In that moment, standing 22 stories above the city I loved, I felt something shift inside me. Something fundamental and permanent. The woman who had entered that gala last night no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer, and unafraid of her own power. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm interested." "Good," Marcus nodded. "Because the announcement goes out tomorrow morning. You have exactly 24 hours to prepare for your new role." As the sun began its descent behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the rooftop garden, I allowed myself a small smile. Thomas had given me a 24-hour deadline without realizing it, and I was about to meet it in a way he never could have anticipated. The morning sun streamed through the windows of my brownstone. As I adjusted my emerald green blazer and checked my reflection one final time, today wasn't just any day. It was exactly 24 hours since Thomas had publicly labeled me a failure, and I was about to give my response. After leaving the office yesterday, I'd gone straight to our home, changed the security codes, and called a locksmith to replace the physical locks. Then I'd methodically gathered every piece of evidence that hadn't already been backed up digitally. Notes, calendar entries, even the passive-aggressive post-its Thomas would leave on my designs. "Are you sure about this approach?" When he'd arrived home to find himself locked out, the texts had started. "This is childish. Let me in. You're making a fool of yourself. Everything in that house is half mine. This is illegal. The partners will see this as more evidence of your instability." I hadn't responded to any of them. Instead, I'd poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet he'd always said was wasted on my undeveloped palate, and taken a long, luxurious bath in the soaking tub he'd claimed needed to be replaced. By morning, his threats had escalated to legal action, then pivoted to sudden remorse. "We can work this out, baby." I was under so much pressure. When those got no response, he'd tried one final approach. "I made you. Without me, you're nothing." That last text almost made me laugh. He still didn't understand what had happened. He thought this was about punishment, about getting even. He couldn't comprehend that I had simply, finally, stepped into my own power. At 8:45 a.m., I arrived at the office for the all-staff meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. The conference room was already filling up with curious colleagues who'd heard rumors but had no confirmation of yesterday's events. I took a seat near the front, ignoring the whispers and concerned glances. At precisely 9, Marcus entered with the other 3 partners and the head of HR. His eyes found mine briefly, a small nod passing between us. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As many of you have noticed, there have been some significant personnel changes in the past 24 hours. I want to address these directly before speculation creates an uncomfortable work environment." The room fell silent, all eyes focused on Marcus. Yesterday, serious allegations of professional sabotage and misconduct were brought to our attention, supported by substantial evidence. After thorough investigation, Thomas Reynolds has been terminated from this firm, effective immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was racing. "We have already begun a comprehensive audit of all projects he was involved with, and will be contacting affected clients as necessary," Marcus continued. "While I cannot share all details for legal reasons, I want to be clear. This firm does not tolerate unethical behavior of any kind, regardless of someone's position or connections." I felt Rachel's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently in support. "Now, moving forward," Marcus's tone shifted, becoming more positive. "I'm pleased to announce that after unanimous board approval, we are appointing a new sustainability director to lead our growing environmental design division." This was it, the moment that Thomas had tried so desperately to prevent. Allison Reynolds has consistently demonstrated exceptional vision, integrity, and leadership throughout her 7 years with this firm. Her innovative approach to the Westside development saved the client millions while setting new standards for urban sustainability. The board is confident she will bring the same excellence to this new role. The applause started slowly, then built as colleagues stood. Not everyone, of course. Thomas had his allies, but enough that I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with validation. As I walked to the front to accept the position, I caught sight of a familiar figure through the glass wall of the conference room. Thomas stood in the lobby, having somehow talked his way past reception. Our eyes met across the distance, his filled with cold fury, mine steady and calm. I turned away from him and toward my colleagues. "Thank you for this opportunity and your vote of confidence. As many of you know, the past day has been challenging." A small ripple of uncomfortable laughter. "But challenges often reveal our true capabilities." I outlined my vision for the sustainability division, my voice growing stronger with each point. As I spoke, I noticed security discreetly escorting Thomas from the building in my peripheral vision. He was no longer my concern. After the meeting, congratulations poured in from colleagues, some genuinely enthusiastic, others clearly recalibrating their assessment of me in real time. Office politics never change, but my position within them had transformed overnight. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Saw the firm's press release online. Congratulations, Director Reynolds. Justice looks good on you." By mid-afternoon, I was settled into my new office. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, the very one Thomas had been angling for. As I arranged my reference materials on sustainable materials innovation, my assistant knocked lightly. "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment but says it's important." A Mrs. Catherine Reynolds? My mother-in-law. I'd always had a complex relationship with Catherine, a brilliant former judge who had somehow never seen, or chosen not to see, her son's manipulative nature. "Send her in," I said, preparing myself for accusations and defense of her precious son. Catherine entered, immaculately dressed as always, her silver hair in its perfect bob. But something was different in her expression, a weariness I hadn't seen before. "Congratulations on your promotion," she said formally, remaining standing even when I offered her a seat. "Thank you, Catherine. What can I do for you?" She placed a small flash drive on my desk. "Thomas doesn't know I'm here, and he certainly doesn't know about this." I looked at the drive, then back at her, questioning. It contains evidence that Thomas did the same thing to his previous girlfriend at his former firm in Boston, the one he said had mental health issues and tried to ruin his career out of jealousy. I should have given it to you years ago. I stared at her, speechless. I told myself he'd changed, that he'd learned his lesson. She straightened her already perfect posture. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. He gets it from his father. I spent 30 years making excuses for that man, too. Don't make my mistake. After she left, I sat looking at the flash drive, understanding that the story I'd been living was even larger and more complex than I'd realized. Thomas hadn't invented his tactics for me. They were practiced, perfected, inherited. At 5:30 p.m., exactly 24 hours after his public humiliation of me, I sent a company-wide email outlining my first initiative as sustainability director, a mentor program specifically designed to support women and minorities in architectural leadership. The first response came almost immediately, from Marcus. Approved. Budget allocated. Let's change the culture, not just the buildings. I looked out my office window at the city stretching before me, buildings I had helped design reaching toward the sky. For the first time in years, I felt the full force of my own capabilities, unchained from the constant undertow of doubt that Thomas had so carefully cultivated. He had called me a failure in public, but my response wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about finally, completely, gloriously being right about myself. 6 months passed in a blur of projects, presentations, and profound personal recalibration. Leading the sustainability division demanded everything I had, which turned out to be far more than I'd been allowed to believe. The divorce proceedings were underway, messy and contentious as expected. Thomas had hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in portraying professional women as unstable and vindictive. But my own lawyer, a referral from Catherine, ironically, was methodically dismantling his narrative with the same evidence that had cost him his job. He's offering to settle, my lawyer informed me during our weekly call. Wants to avoid further damage to his professional reputation. What are his terms? I asked, already knowing they'd be designed to benefit him at my expense. He'll drop all claims to your family inheritance and retirement accounts if you sign an NDA about the circumstances of his termination. I considered this briefly. Tell him no. The truth isn't negotiable. There was a time when I would have taken the easier path, avoiding conflict at any cost. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that some battles need to be fought, not just for yourself, but for those who might find themselves in similar situations. At work, the changes were even more dramatic. The mentor program had expanded beyond our firm, becoming a citywide initiative for women in architecture and engineering. We'd received a Sustainability Innovation Award for the Eastridge project, the very one Thomas had tried to sabotage with altered efficiency metrics. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt that crept in when I least expected them. 15 years of psychological manipulation doesn't vanish overnight. Sometimes I'd catch myself second-guessing a decision, hearing Thomas's voice in my head. Are you sure you've thought this through? Remember how you struggled with the Parker Building concept? On those days, I'd pull out the journal I'd started keeping, not documenting Thomas's behavior anymore, but my own achievements, big and small, evidence to counter the lingering echoes of his voice. The firm's annual gala came around again, the same event where, 1 year earlier, Thomas had publicly declared me a failure. I'd considered skipping it, but that would have been allowing him to claim that space in my story. I chose a red dress this time, not black. Bold, confident, impossible to overlook. As I entered the ballroom alone, I felt eyes turn toward me, but the whispers were different now. These were whispers of respect, of recognition. The Westridge extension you designed is magnificent, said one of our biggest clients, approaching with genuine admiration. That living wall system is unlike anything I've seen. The mentor program has transformed our daughter's experience at her firm, shared the wife of one of the partners. She says it's the first time she's felt truly supported. Marcus found me by the champagne fountain, looking more relaxed than he had all year. The sustainability division has increased revenue by 22% since you took over, he said without preamble. The board is impressed. And so am I. Thank you for taking a chance on me, I replied. He shook his head slightly. I didn't take a chance on you, Allison. I simply got out of your way. Later that evening, as the event was winding down, I stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet reflection. The city lights spread before me like a galaxy of possibilities, each one representing a future I was now free to choose. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Your presentation on the Hudson Project was featured in Architectural Digest today. Thomas saw it. He knows now what he lost. I didn't respond. Thomas's recognition, or lack thereof, no longer mattered to me. I had stopped measuring my worth through his eyes. As I stood there under the vast night sky, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, shrinking myself to fit into the narrow space he'd allocated for me, mistaking control for care, criticism for concern. That night when he'd called me a failure in public had been both the worst moment of my life and, paradoxically, the beginning of my real success. Not the external success of promotions and accolades, though those were gratifying, but the deeper success of reclaiming my own story. I realized then that the greatest revenge wasn't proving Thomas wrong. It wasn't even about Thomas at all. It was about proving myself right, about who I was, what I was capable of, and what I deserved. The true failure would have been staying one more day in a life that was too small for my spirit. I raised my champagne glass in a silent toast to the woman I'd become. Not perfect, still healing, but irrevocably, gloriously free. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes being called a failure in public is just the push you need to show the world, and yourself, what success really looks like.